I won't even say anything. You'll hear the timer and then just know that you should wrap it up fairly quickly.
Wait, the 3 minute to talk about our theory?
The beginning. So we're gonna, you get 3 to 5 minutes to just give us an overview of why you like that theory.
Okay.
And then they're gonna ask us questions. So that's the structure that we're gonna do.
Okay, sorry, I thought you said 5 to 10, but 3 to
Oh,
5.
wow.
Okay.
That would be nice, but then we'd be here till
Yep.
midnight.
You're right. Is there any way that people could introduce themselves too? Because like I said.
Now we're down to 2 minutes and 45
Yeah,
seconds.
so we really can't let them do that, but they're all.
Sorry, Dr. Collins.
Just take my word for it, they're all awesome. And they're gonna show you how smart they are by the questions that they've
Well,
prepared.
maybe when they
to ask.
ask their
Yeah,
questions,
Yes.
say their
Yeah.
name.
Excellent idea.
Good, that works.
Thank you,
Okay.
I appreciate it.
So we're gonna start down there with Dr. Collins, and
I
so
already
just
introduced myself.
introduce.
I wanted to know exactly who I was. So
Okay,
they know.
and you got 3 minutes to introduce your theory as well.
Oh,
Tell
this-
why you like it.
Go
Oh,
for
at
it.
this moment, okay. I'm interested in Bandura's theory of self-efficacy. And the way I think about it, and what I wanted to present today through a very brief introduction to the study, actually it's my dissertation, is that using a theory is a process of deciding on, from a conceptual perspective, that's why I like it, how you define the variables. Very, very useful. And how you develop an argument for why this variable versus that variable is effective for looking at your particular research question. And the theory then advances throughout the study as you actually collect your data, and then you interpret your data based on the degree that the variables allow you to interpret what you want to obtain when looking at your research question. Theory is very, very useful in conclusions. How do you interpret it? And lastly, depending on the type of study you're doing, more of a deductive study where you have a hypothesis, it's very helpful in defining how you interpret your hypothesis relative to that particular theory. And the bottom line is, by doing it, you then create you contribute to a corpus of information, allowing someone like Jason or someone else who didn't do that my study, who go in and actually find it and say, okay, Bandura's study, I see what Collins is doing here. It's extremely useful. It's very much, it's not just simply at the end of the study, it's not theory shopping. When I first started, I thought it was theory shopping. We used to tease about that when we were graduate students. It's not. It's very much, very selective, extremely strategic, and it allows you then a much broader interpretation of what you're looking at. That's it.
Wow. Can I have her time?
Go for it.
That's okay. What are you talking about, Jennifer?
Constructivism.
Can she go before me? That would make more sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
go Jennifer.
I'm Dr. Beasley.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Beasley.
And I just love constructivism. So so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to talk specifically about kind of my thread of that. As you guys know, basically at its core, it's really looking at a theory about how people learn. They construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing things, reflecting on their experiences. And, we can see everything, including children's play, as a purpose for learning. Personally, I would love to hug Jerome Bruner, and that, guys, that this is kind of what happens to you when you go to graduate school, is you read about people and you just begin to love them. And Jerome Bruner, oh my gosh, I love this guy. He wrote, I think maybe in 1960, The Process of Education, and he really looks at just this idea that a learner constructs new ideas or concepts based on existing knowledge. And he said to perceive is to categorize, to conceptualize is to categorize, to learn is to form categories, to make decisions is to categorize. And for me, what it's meant in my own research, I am really just fascinated by the way someone understands maybe a new philosophy, a new concept, how they begin to categorize that, begin to understand that, unpack that. One of my very first research studies that I did was called Philosophy in Action, How First-Year Teachers Define Differentiation in Their First Year of Practice. And just, they learned about this, in their senior year, and then I followed them out to their first year of teaching to see They said all these great things about differentiation. They defined it in this very solid, concrete way, but, you know, what did it look like when it came to putting it into action in their classroom? And so, to me, I began to understand, what can a first-year teacher really do? What should we be teaching in a class about differentiation to help that idea stick with them? So that's kind of, I could go on and on about Jerome Bruner, but I know that we have a very short amount of time. If you want to ask me later about him.
You still got 20 seconds to brag about your own.
Can I just suggest that you guys look up Man, A Course of Study? This was an amazing, I love curriculum, and there is actually a documentary about his really rich, amazing curriculum where he had 10-year-olds thinking about questions such as, how do we build a better society? What is culture? What's in a lifetime? It's fascinating, Jennifer, it's fascinating.
Essential question for Man, Course of Study. Bruner's question was, what makes us human and how can we become more so?
Yeah.
Man, Course of Study. So I do love Bruner. This is Bruner myself, so if I go next.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so you all have studied critical theory, yes? All right, and so now you've heard a lot about constructivism, which I know that you've also studied. So critical constructivism is sort of the melding of the two. And it's really based on the idea of subjugated knowledge, okay? And so subjugated knowledge is something that I think about in both my teaching and my research. When I teach teachers how to teach and when I conduct my research, subjugated knowledge is important. So subjugated knowledge, if you think back to what you learned about critical theory, is sort of the knowledge that does not come out when when the powers that be are the ones who are controlling the way that information is exposed to different people, right? So in my teaching, what I try to do is to get students to consider the knowledge that isn't in the textbook, the knowledge that isn't right there on the surface, the knowledge that isn't always agreed upon, the knowledge that definitely doesn't come out of the state of Texas. Those are the sorts of things that I want my students to consider. And in my research, I do the same sort of thing. I look for to construct knowledge from the subjugated information that comes from the people that don't get asked, from the powers that be are the ones that are doing the asking, right? So this can go through all of the different things that you do when you plan, when you teach, when you talk to other people, when you do your own research, when you do historical research, when you do educational research. Just the idea that how can I ask this question, but more importantly, who can I ask it of? And then another important part of this is what's my relationship to that? Because I'm very cognizant of this as a white male, that I am also in a dominant position in this society. And so as a result, what ends up happening is that I have to be very reflexive in the way that I think about everything that I do, because I know that I perceive that through a lens that is from that dominant position, right? So even in my attempts to uncover the subjugated knowledge, I do so knowing that I'm going to be missing a lot of it, right? And so that then means that in my research, I have to make sure that I do things to uncover even more of that. And when I teach, I have to be really careful to go that extra mile to find the things that may not necessarily occur to me because of who I am and the privilege that I hold in society. And that's probably the easiest way to say it.
You still have
Oh, I'm done.
39
Hey,
minutes.
this is the first time I ever say anything 3 minutes.
I
Let's
know.
get it out of class. I'm dropping the mic and I'm heading out on that.
So proud of
Yeah.
you. Okay, do you want to go next?
I'll go last.
Okay.
Are you talking to me?
I am talking, I am a panelist. Yep, because we must have some
Sure.
cultural theory.
Agreed. Yep.
Okay, so
You might want to
Laura's
keep what
going
you
next,
do.
is that right?
Yes.
You're not leaving, oh, you have.
No, I'm not here for 3 minutes and out.
Please.
Okay.
So I'm Elizabeth Laura. I teach special education here. My background is educational psychology and psychology, really. I am a behavior analyst, and I say that with pride. Behaviorism, I think, is a little bit different from the other theories that we've talked about today and that you've probably learned about, because it covers more than just learning. It is a theory of all behavior. So we don't just look at human behavior, we look at non-human behavior. We look at sophisticated behaviors like thinking and experiences. We also look at very primitive behaviors like rats pressing a lever in an operating chamber. I was first exposed to behavior analysis working in an animal research lab at Temple University. So for me, it was that very primitive behavior study that I was first exposed to as a 19-year-old undergraduate. After that experience, the world just kind of made sense to me. So it makes sense now that all of my research and my whole life is based off of this philosophy of this science of human behavior. Behavior analysis is a selectionist theory. So much like evolution, how some traits are carried on, others are extinguished throughout the species history, the same can be true for an organism's history. Certain behaviors are carried on, those behaviors that increase the likelihood of your survival and reproduction, and some behaviors that impede on the chances of your survival, those that are punished, are extinguished over time. So we can take any type of complex behavior, break it down into this contingency, and explain how that behavior is reproduced over time based on reinforcement or law of effect.
Wow.
I can keep going. We can talk about the
You have a minute if you'd like.
Okay. So the three-term contingency is how we break all of these complex behaviors down. So every behavior is said to have an occasioning stimulus, which we call the discriminative stimulus, or the SD. We then have the response, and then finally we have a consequence, which is either punishment or reinforcement, which can predict whether or not that behavior will be reproduced again in the future. We can look at complex behaviors like thoughts and feelings and break them down into these three-term contingencies. We don't, however, attribute behavior to being the byproduct of a thought or a feeling. We say that thoughts and feelings are the byproducts of behaviors. So if you lie, you feel guilty. It's not your guilt that makes you lie. And how would we know if somebody's lying because they're guilty? How would you find that out? You'd have to ask them. But we know that people are not good at saying how they feel. They're not good at reporting their own behavior. So we don't rely on that stagey correspondence. We rely only on things that are directly observable. So thank you.
You have 5 seconds. Quick!
Go Skinner!
Okay. I also have a handout. Would you help me pass that out? Thank you. All right, I am going to start a timer for myself, just to be fair.
Yeah, keep it.
So, as you know, I'm talking about sociocultural theory in my practice and research. This is not the first time that they've heard about sociocultural theory in my practice and research. But I thought I'd talk about early influences on my research. If Dr. Beasley was a Bruner fan, I was definitely a P. David Pearson fan, and I can never see myself hugging him, but I was definitely a Pearson groupie, and Pearson has been around for a long time in terms of theory, and so he was a cognitivist, and he might even still say that he is a cognitivist. And one thing you probably know about P. David Pearson is the gradual release of responsibility theory. I think many of you have heard about that as a pedagogical practice. And so Pearson and Gallagher created that on a napkin in the restaurant one night. So save those napkins, they might be worth something someday. And that gradual release of responsibility model, although it was cognitivist in its inception, when you think about its application, there are really sociocultural applications to that model. And my primary research focus is mentoring and coaching. And as you can see, that is very interactionist, just in terms of defining what is a mentor or what is a coach. It's an interaction. And so I was looking at the interactions between the teachers and coaches, or between the student teachers and their mentors. And so I really wanted to add that sociocultural layer to this cognitivist perspective. So the trajectory of my research has been looking at how mentors and coaches release responsibility over time to the people that they're working with and support their own thinking. So Vygotsky's work really rang true for me as I was thinking about that model for mentoring and coaching. I've got a couple of key quotes here. Vygotsky said that human learning presupposes a specific social nature and a process by which children, and I put that in parentheses because I think that's just learners, grow into the intellectual life of those around them. So how do we grow and change intellectually and become, as the next quote says, through others we become ourselves. So we accommodate, we incorporate ideas into ourselves that we've seen in others, and in Vygotsky's case, he emphasizes more knowledgeable others. And, oh, yeah, so that picture is my model for mentoring and coaching, which you would recognize as almost an upside-down version of the gradual release of responsibility model. And across the bottom are interactions, social interactions that occur between the person being mentored, the coach, and the person that they're working with. So the next thing that we're going to do is we have one question for each of the panelists, and then as time allows, we have some more general questions that will be asked afterwards. And if we have time, we'll do some concluding remarks at the end, just reflecting on listening to each other talk. So.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Dana Renee. Say I go by Renee.
Sorry.
Nobody knows who I am because my email is a scam one, so it's just really confusing. I have a question for Dr. Laura. Many associate behaviorism with the acquisition of early learning skills, learning numbers, letters, repetition. How does behaviorism account for the learning of higher order thinking skills, such as writing essays, complex problem solving, etc.?
Sure. Well, that's the first misconception on your list of common misconceptions. In there, I give you 9, just to name a few, fields where behavior analysis is effectively used. I think probably the most relevant to Renee's question is that of organizational behavior management. So we have behavior analysts, some are board certified, some are not, employed at Fortune 500 companies all over the world. Companies like Xerox and AT&T contract with Aubrey Daniels, who's a board certified behavior analyst. And what he does for these companies is study how to increase the performance of their employees. So rather than having an employee who's not performing, rather than just firing that employee, they institute behavior change procedures with those employees. And they do this quite effectively. Little variations in organizational behavior management can produce great change in employee production, such as just making clear what the expectations are for an employee. It's amazing how easily that little manipulation can increase the productivity of human performance. Creativity is a different area where we do have some behavior analytic research done, which is more of an abstract type of a construct, I guess. It's hard for me to even think that way. But well, then you'll like this. We can take behaviors like creativity and break them down into that behavior analytic framework that I described earlier. And basically what we see happening is just simple differential reinforcement. So do we really have truly creative and innovative ideas or inventions? And Jason and I might disagree about this, but I would argue no, we don't. What we have are slight variations on already existing models. And what happens over time is those mutations, right? It's a selectionist theory. Those mutations produce greater rates of reinforcement. So you continue to mutate your behavior a little bit at a time, contacting more and more reinforcement. And then what do you have? Creativity. So we can take complex behaviors like that and break them down through behavior analytic lens.
I've never heard creativity described that way.
Well,
Never.
I just realized that we probably need a 3-minute for responses.
Sorry.
No, I'm sure you
That
stayed
was
within
good.
that.
That was the thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question.
I'm going to ask Dr. Eric a
Yep.
question. What is the difference between constructivism and critical constructivism? and who is the biggest man behind the theory that you are in favor of?
Good question. Kinchlow is his name, Joe Kinchlow, Kinchloe.
I thought you were going to say Endicott.
No, no, definitely not. He's actually in the field, well, he passed away fairly recently, but he was in the field of social studies education, which is one of the reasons why I also, because I'm a social studies ed myself. So really the difference is that they mesh really well because the ideas behind how knowledge is constructed individually and socially is the same. The idea that we have a common memory, that we share knowledge, but that we also understand it in our own individual way, that we could all have the same experience, but yet come away from that knowing that experience differently. But yet, if we all sat in a room, we would all be able to talk about it in a common way, right? So in other words, constructivism is based sort of on the idea that we construct knowledge sort of from the ground up, using pieces and organizing them, categorizing them, putting them into schema and so forth. So the critical nature of that is just in what we look for when we do that construction, right? So if you are a learner or a teacher who is satisfied in only using the information that is easily found and or the information that is handed to you by those folks who create, let's say, standardized curriculums or the history curriculum in Texas, I'm going to keep talking about Texas, then the way that you construct knowledge is going to be based on a certain way of thinking, right? In other words, think about all of the experiences that you've had and the way that you construct knowledge from those experiences. If you have different experiences, you construct knowledge differently, right? So critical constructivists think we have to turn over this way we think about getting knowledge and make sure that we're looking for knowledge in places that it's not easy to find. And so that means going against the counter narratives in history. It means in research looking for voices of people who are subjugated in whatever way, race, class, gender, sexuality, whatever it might happen to be. Those are the things that you do in critical constructivism. Is not to say that you totally eschew the general knowledge, but one thing that's really great about it is that when you find this sort of knowledge, it allows you to push it against what the typical understanding is, right? So in other words, it's like, here's what everybody knows to be true because this is what we've decided is true. But then when I use the word true, and those of you who have me in class know that I don't like the word true very much, but in other words, this is what we understand to be the way reality is. And then when you look underneath that, you can push against that. And that's what critical constructivists really do, is try to push against that in order to reveal some of those things that wouldn't otherwise reveal themselves.
Just curious with McLaren, this is very interesting. McLaren,
Yeah, absolutely.
someone-
I mean, well, some of you would draw from, but you know, in the research fields, absolutely, yeah, because ways of thinking.
It resonates a lot with how we do
Mhm.
it. Just curious.
All right, I'm Laura Searcy, and my question is for Dr. Collins. I work a lot with pre-service teachers, and so I was wondering how that observational learning that they do with their master teachers, their clinical faculty, or their mentor, how can that improve their self-efficacy?
I really don't know. I mean, it's such a subjective interpretation as to how one might interpret and observe the behavior and then make a decision to internalize it or not. When I'm thinking about, in sort of a roundabout way, when I'm thinking about efficacy or Bandura's theory relative to teaching, I'm thinking about it as personal efficacy, how much effort one expends. And I'm also thinking about outcome expectancy, the degree that how much the student performance is influenced by teaching, and how much effort does it take to actually do that. And in reference to the personal, I'm talking more about the competence profile instead. So it's competence, expended effort, and outcome expectancy. So I would think that if you follow along with that idea of Bandura's interpretation of teaching efficacy, that is, as one that is observing a mentor teacher might look at those characteristics. That's how I would do it. So I might want to look to the degree that there's confidence, that one feels prepared, that one is organized, but that is an indication of confidence to a certain degree, that one is clear about what they're doing and feel they can handle any obstacle. And also the sensitivity on the part of the individual teacher or the mentor, that it takes effort. It's not going to necessarily be an immediate positive response to that. And also the degree that the teacher truly believes or the observed, the individual doing the teaching and being observed, do they really believe that their instruction is going to make a difference with students? And why this is so important is because some students have atypical responses to instruction. They can be frustrating. They can be perplexing. I'm not so much talking about problematic behaviors as much as I'm talking about students who may process information differently or show poor affect. Sometimes associated with learning disabilities. They come in with typical behaviors and they look so, I hate to say normal, because none of us are that normal, to be honest. But typical behavior, all of a sudden they process information differently. And as a result of that processing issue, self-regulation, for example, their behaviors then starting to become labeled as disabled or handicapped. So the teacher then has to make decisions with self-efficacy comes in. How much effort do I put out? How much confidence do I have that I can teach this particular student? And what are my expectations? So I think in a roundabout way, that's what I would look for. And I think that's the connection between mentor, coach, and novice teacher. Does that help at all? Tricky question, now. But you just don't know.
This is the first time I've ever heard her say.
Oh. That is ridiculous.
For those of you who are from qualitative, she blows me out of the water, so.
Actually, it's sort of funny, I never heard a white male say that they were a white male. I mean, I had an argument with somebody in the area, he was irritating me, so I just said, you sound like such a white male. English white male. He announces to the table, do you know what she just called me? I was like in awe. He actually said that. I mean, I really was. I was like, wow, I wish I could take that.
It's on tape.
It's on
I
tape.
know.
I share the tape.
And just carried around me, so hey, look at this.
All right.
Okay, so this is for Dr. Bullock. Comparing PJ's theory with cognitive development to Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development, can you give me an example of a learning situation that would challenge PJ's theory with Vygotsky's?
Yeah, so, you
You
know, I
saw
saw
these.
these.
Oh, because I was like,
Yeah, but
I don't get a
now I
question
can't
like
remember
that.
what I thought about when I saw it this afternoon. Because what I'm really thinking about is the totally different conception of learning that these two men theorized. And Piaget talked about learning as going from the inside out, and Vygotsky talked about learning as going from the outside in. And so if we think about, if I needed to challenge Piaget's theory, I would just pull up an example of when it seems clear that learning is happening from the outside in. And because of our discussion earlier today, I'm thinking about Socratic Seminar and how Socratic Seminar seems to me to be a very clear example of learning going from the outside in. Although if I were a big Piaget advocate, I would probably say, but they did all that preparation in advance and they thought about it and they constructed some knowledge, you know, before they sat down in the Socratic Seminar. So there's never a clear-cut answer, but I would think that I could make a pretty strong argument about Socratic Seminar being a challenge to Piaget's theory.
These questions are hard.
Very good.
That's because I have smart
That's
students.
Hey,
Smart
I can't wait to hear the one for the behavior.
We already got it.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been thinking about it ever since. There's got to be one for Dr. Beasley, right?
Yeah.
I'm Aisha.
Shoot.
So if I don't get it,
Some teachers are interested in having a specific list of characteristic behaviors
or activity that could be performed in classroom or that they could observe in their student. In other words, can we simplify constructivism into a C